This is my 2011 Mustang GT, and it is a car that I love very, very much. And although it's not everybody's cup of tea, the Mustang GT as a whole is undoubtedly one of the most successful sports cars to ever be made. And although in recent years Mustangs as a whole have become the butt of many a joke, no model level of Mustang has endured the abuse nearly as much for decades as the base model V6 Mustangs. Why? What's wrong with the V6? Well, many of you might be thinking, just like a lot of people through history, well, the base Mustang engine is just the one for posers that just want to look like they have a fast car but don't actually care about the performance behind it. If you're a real car guy or a real car enthusiast in general, you'll of course at least get the V8, if not one of the higher up models with a supercharger like a GT500 or whatever it may be. And while I hear you, and while I think that there is certainly validity to that argument, let's take a step back and look at the numbers behind the most recent 3.7 liter V6 Mustangs compared to Mustangs with the V8s of the past. But to start, this Mustang GT, it is a Gen 1 Coyote. My particular car is a first year Coyote. It makes 412 horsepower at the crank. Mine has some additional modifications, so we're probably pulling something like that to the wheels. But regardless, that's a decent chunk of power. And in fact, the most recent version of the Coyote, the Gen 4, that is going to be found in the S650 Mustangs, and particularly the Dark Horse, makes 500 horsepower at the crank, bone stock. The most recent iteration of a V6 engine that you could find in Mustangs was the 3.7 liter Cyclone V6, and that engine has been since dropped. The base model Mustang is now using the EcoBoost 2.3 liter. But this 3.7 liter V6 does make a fairly respectable 307 horsepower at the crank. And yes, I know that is over 100 horsepower down from this particular car, but it's only 8 horsepower down from the GT Mustang of only a year earlier. I get it, there is nothing quite like a V8, especially in a muscle and or pony car. Let's not get too caught up in the difference between those two. And that is a completely valid point. The 3.7 liter V6, or really any V6 in any muscle car, it's not quite the same as a big roaring V8. But to be fair, I don't think that this argument is designed for people that are trying to be convinced to get a V6 instead of a V8. Instead, if you're already looking at a car of this sort, for instance, maybe you're interested in a 350 or a 370Z or something like that, or a Genesis Coupe or something along those lines, a 3.7 liter Mustang falls right into the same general price bracket and category as those cars and might be a good choice for you. In fact, on Kelley Blue Book, I have pulled up right now the average prices according to my zip code for a used 2011 Mustang GT Coupe, just a base model GT, from a private party in good condition, and the average private party price is $12,654. I'm well aware that Kelley Blue Book is far from actually the most realistic prices for what these vehicles are selling for. I know that I certainly didn't pay $12,000 for my car, but regardless, that's what it says. But for a base 2011 Mustang with the 3.7 liter V6, otherwise spec'd exactly the same, the average private party price in my area supposedly is $8,265. Again, I'm not saying these are the exact prices that you'll find these cars for. Kelley Blue Book, again, not always the most realistic resource to find prices from, but taking those two prices into mind, that is an over $4,000 difference. And think about what you could do with $4,000 to a 3.7 liter V6 Mustang. You could put the bulk of that money towards a supercharger and make more power than a bone stock Coyote. And these are engines that are known to handle this power fairly reliably. There's actually examples of cars on bone stock internals making like 600 wheel horsepower. Now, are those going to hold up as well as a 600 horsepower Coyote probably would? No, most likely not, but it's still very impressive numbers for a car that can be had for a very reasonable price. And if we stop and think about the numbers, specifically for the S197 generation of the 3.7 liter V6 Mustangs, let's say they roughly weigh around 3,500 pounds. I think some of them weigh less than that, some of them weigh a decent amount more than that, but that's maybe an average, lower average of the weight that you can come to expect. And they make 307 horsepower. I don't know the torque numbers off the top of my head, I apologize. And a 370Z of a similar year range weighs roughly 3,300 pounds, potentially a little bit more, depending on how it's spec'd, and makes 300 and some odd horsepower. It's almost 330 if I remember correctly. A Genesis Coupe with the, I believe it's a 3.6 liter V6, correct me if I'm wrong on that, makes roughly the exact same horsepower. I think it's 306 horsepower and weighs about 3,400 pounds. The V6 Camaro from this year range makes 306 horsepower and weighs something like 3,700 pounds. Or even if you're going back and looking at a 350Z, if you're looking at an earlier DE model, from the factory they make 287 horsepower. For the later models like the rev up motor and the HR motor, it's 300 and 306, I think, horsepower respectively. And so that's with the car that's weighing 3,200 up to 3,300 pounds stock as well. And the point of bringing all these statistics into it is, for as much crap as V6 Mustangs get, there's still a potentially amazing performance bargain. And these particular engines are capable of making power incredibly well with forced induction, and in a lot of ways, better than what the competition is able to do. Good luck making over 400 wheel horsepower on a VQ35DE in an early 350Z without blowing your engine. You are living on limited amount of time while doing so. But even comparing the V6 Mustangs to the V8 cars of not so many years ago, the performance of them is genuinely impressive. Like I said, if we step back to the earlier S197s of 05 to 09 with the 4.6 liter single overhead cam mod motor, they made 315 horsepower from the factory, which is barely any more. They do have more torque, and I believe they do weigh slightly less. So is the V6 engine going to outperform that? Most likely not, but is it going to be incredibly close? Yes. And if we step back not so many years before to the SN95 New Edge Mustangs, they were only making a little over 260 horsepower at the crank. And the earlier SN95s, only 215. So yeah, the 3.7 V6 Mustang, or you could even extend this to the V6 versions of a lot of different muscle cars out there, especially the 3.6 liter V6 that you find in the newer Camaros. Might they have the stigma of being the poser's choice? Sure. Do they perform as well as their V8 counterparts? No, they do not. But do they deserve more respect? I think personally they absolutely do. I don't think the V6 versions of these cars are for the people that are interested in the V8 cars in general. I don't think that the V6 version of these cars are for people that are going to step their way up into a V8 eventually. The V6 versions of these cars could be potentially for a completely different crowd. It could be a gateway into sports car ownership in the first place for someone that can't afford a V8 version of the Mustang or the Camaro or the Challenger or whatever it may be. And for the Camaro and the Mustang, these are still available in 6-speed manual transmissions, which still makes them incredibly fun. So if you're out there and you're considering a lot of different vehicles under this same general category of performance and price, such as the 350Zs, 370Zs, G35s, G37s, Genesis Coupes of the world, and you like how the Mustang looks, you like the idea of a Mustang, but you can't quite afford, or maybe you don't want the V8, check out a 3.7 liter V6 Mustang. And hey, don't let anybody tell you that you shouldn't. It's a great engine and it's a great car. It's not a V8, but maybe that's a good thing. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Obviously, I love V8 cars in general and V8 Mustangs. I mean, I have one. I absolutely understand why people like them, but I do think that as a general community of car enthusiasts, the V6 versions of these muscle cars could absolutely use more respect, because as we look around, it's like we have cars like the base S models of like the Jaguar F-Type barely make any more power with a supercharged V6, or even like Porsche Caymans and stuff like that. Like, yes, they're much lighter, but straight line speed, there's not that much of a difference. So let's give these cars a little bit more credit, and I would love to see these used as drift missiles, potential drag builds or track cars, so much more than they currently are, and I think that we're gonna start seeing that. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you guys for stopping by the video. If you did enjoy this video and you'd like to see more car content from me, including more content about my Ford Mustang GT, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and I will see you guys all in the next one.